Hi, I'm Alice Simon. I'm the co-director of the Walter Mate Center. I also teach economics in the economics department, and it is my pleasure, my absolute pleasure, to introduce our guest speaker this afternoon. On behalf of the economics department, on behalf of the Walter Mate Center, on behalf of our students and our faculty, I would like to welcome Mr. Clark Winter. He is our Milligan Leaders in Business lecturer for today. His complete biography is in your brochure if you would like to read it. But I find it interesting to note that even though he's giving a business leaders lecture, Clark was a fine arts major at Ohio Wesleyan, and he has gone on to have an extensive career in investment banking. He has lived overseas for over 10 years in Madrid, Spain, and Mexico City. He went on to become a global investment strategist with Citigroup and Goldman Sachs. He recently founded the Clark Winter Enterprises, which is a global investment research and strategy firm. And he serves as trustee, advisor, and board member of a very select group of significant investors worldwide. His research and analysis helps investors understand and harness the many forces that are at work today in a very complicated and confusing global economy. He has been a frequent guest commentator for CNBC Worldwide Exchange, CNBC Closing Bell, Bloomberg Television, and Fox Business Network. He has been described as one of Wall Street's most insightful and honest intellectual brokers.
I like honest.
You like that one?
Yeah.
Okay. So it is my pleasure, my absolute pleasure, to introduce to you to Mr. Clark Winter.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a real treat to be here, and I'm going to turn on my timer so I don't get it right. When asked to speak today, I thought about what I would talk about. I'm a graduate. I have a BFA in fine arts and photography. I never took an economics course here, not one. Don't read anything into that. But what it meant is, will somebody tell me, can I ask you to tell me when we're about 3:30? Because I don't have a watch. Somebody? I will. 40 minutes. But I did study art. I loved art. I spent my junior year in Italy. I got out of school. I was enrolled at RISD and Yale for my master's in fine arts, and I decided to take a right turn to business. A few months later, I was given a job at a couple of banks. I knew nothing. I told them very clearly that I knew nothing, and I think they liked that. The fact that I was honest that I knew nothing, because they knew that I knew nothing. But that I knew that I knew nothing was really significant. And 6 months into it, I was asked by the head of the international visit at JP Morgan, where I was employed, to go be number 2 in a 2-person office in Madrid, Spain. 6 months later, Franco died. I was number 1 in a 1-person office in a very insignificant country that all of a sudden became very significant. And I was very fortunate to be in a place, and I felt, if some of you will remember conceptual art, that I was in a conceptual art project in the audience, and all of a sudden I was asked to walk on stage and be part of it. I said, wow, that's really cool. Let's see where this goes. 6 months became 6 years. I lived through the entire transition. I was rewarded for having done a good job and learned Spanish to be asked to go to Mexico. So I went to Mexico for a couple of months, which became another 5 years. So I spent about 11 years between Spain and Mexico. Spain and Mexico have nothing to do with each other. It's like Cambridge, England, and Oxford, Mississippi. You know, Cambridge, Oxford. One is a member of Europe, and the other is direct descendant of the Aztecs and Mayas and how they think. But you have to understand, so part of what I said when asked to make this presentation is let's talk about things that make sense and things that don't make sense. Because understanding the boundary between what makes sense and doesn't make sense is really important. And we're at a moment in history, I'll suggest, and I'll talk about it, why that's so important right now. I think we're dealing in a world, and I'll give you the headline of what I'll call the visible and incomprehensible. Rumsfeld called it the unknown unknown. That's not the point these days. What's out there and what's really important is not invisible, it's visible. It's simply not comprehensible. And in retrospect, we can look back and see over our lives that certain things that we saw were anomalies, didn't make sense, the pendulum was shifting, and if only we'd known how to put those in context. And right now we're in a remarkable moment like that, and I'll walk through a couple. I say we're in a world of unparalleled economic realignment and political order, and we're doing so without a world war. We should pause and be thankful of that, because most of the other unparalleled realignments of world order have been accompanied with massive brutality. And we're suffering it. Certainly the economic pain is felt by many. The injustice of that call in the football game on Monday night brought the refs back. Did anybody see that play? I saw it by total accident with my son, and I said, how do they get away with that? And it was that sort of catalytic moment that forced the players, the refs, and the league to come back and deal with a situation that they were refusing to deal with. Or somebody said a $10 billion enterprise was at jeopardy because of a $3 or $4 million settlement. And I think that's really important. So, I'm going to give you a bunch of thoughts over the years of things that make sense and don't make sense. Do you ever notice when you're looking at something that doesn't make sense? There's two things I would suggest. Either you don't have enough information, in which case get more and it will make sense, or you have enough information and it doesn't make sense because it doesn't make sense. More information isn't going to improve it. And listen to that, because if you can distinguish that, you will likely both avoid disaster and identify opportunity. Think about that. I'm speaking largely to the students, but the rest of your life is about avoiding disaster on one hand, and more importantly, finding opportunity. And where does opportunity lie? And I'm going to talk a lot about boundaries. Boundaries is something that I'm fascinated right now, because one of the things you're going to have to learn as you go through is that everybody tells you that what they're talking about matters. In fact, that's not true. Most things want to tell you that they matter more. Some things matter less, and a great deal of things don't matter at all. And only in retrospect do you realize that a lot of things that you thought were important really are irrelevant. And a few of the decisions you make in life are really important. And how do you tell the difference? Because most people fill their lives up with urgent and unimportant matters, if you know Tom Peters' book. How do you focus on the unimportant things that really do matter? So a couple of boundary issues on that. What do I mean by boundary? Because we're at a boundary moment in history right now. Artists define boundaries. Scientists define boundaries. Teachers help you learn the boundaries. The boundary is the space between what I call between here and there, where there becomes here and here becomes there. It's that moment in the shift of a pendulum of any type, a grandfather clock, when very heavy objects momentarily become weightless before a complete reversal of trajectory. How can something so heavy be so weightless and all of a sudden go the opposite way? That's really important. China, for most of my life, certainly all the post-war experience was run by the Communist Party. It was a complete unmitigated economic disaster. And somewhere about 15 years ago, the party in power realized that what they were doing was a complete disaster, that it was not leading anywhere. They didn't engage in a mild course correction. They did a complete reversal of course. Think of that. And they're still in power. The Communist Party has, among other anomalies, been the greatest single job-creating engine in the history of the planet Earth. And my facts may be slightly off, but I doubt it. Because they've created something like 400 or 500 million jobs. That's a big number. Now, they got lots of other things that I got to deal with. But in terms of creating jobs, so if you say the Chinese Communist Party can create 400 million jobs, why can't the Republicans and Democrats? We're supposed to be the capitalists. What's wrong with this picture? So think about that moment of the pendulum. Think about when things shift. All of us in this room have had our adult experience in the post-World War, when America reigned supreme. Largely, well, you know the story. We won the first, we won the second. And at the end of the Second World War, the other large masses, land masses, continued to be managed by really bad governments, putting it simply. The Russians, the Chinese, India with its bureaucracy, Latin America with its bureaucracy, Africa, all kinds of problems. And USA was the beneficiary of victory. The boundaries of most of the other nation states had been redefined, in some cases quite radically, and our boundaries were untouched. The USA in our lives became accustomed to what I call determining events and exporting consequences. What do I mean by that? We thought that the decisions that we took mattered more than the decisions that other people. We decide, you react. Or putting it another way, think of a train where you have drivers, passengers, and those who can't figure out whether they're a driver or a passenger are roadkill. You got to figure out which of those two, because there's not a third choice. And we thought we were accustomed and managed to determine the course of world events, and it was largely true. But it's also because we enjoyed the engines of productivity, the best universities, and the greatest land of opportunity. So remember your history, 1946, who came here? Well, Einstein on down. The abstract expressionist painters, the musicians, the physicists, you name it, because there was no sense of opportunity where they were. If you were Chinese in that period and you had a real, or Indian, and I'll just pick those two countries, but I could pick Brazilian, there was not a land of opportunity where you were from because the nation state continued to be run by bureaucrats. Decisions and opportunity were handed down either by authority or by inheritance. So if you had simply the brains and the talent, you had to emigrate. Enough says history. What's not entirely understood by most people in the United States is that's completely changed. Most of these countries are now lands of great opportunity. They haven't fixed all their problems, but this sense of opportunity is no longer a proprietary asset of the United States. It's happening. And on that reversal, in the case of China, when Deng Xiaoping and the followers reversed it, there was an explosion of economic opportunity in China. You know the rest. When Brazil, the bearded communist leader named Lula, who ran for office and became prime minister on a platform, got elected. But unlike other leaders of other countries, instead of saying, between these ears, I have all the bright ideas, he said, I have one idea. I have to create a resumption of economic activity. So he went to all the people in the country who mattered and said, tell me what I should do. And he listened to those people. He empowered the people who knew what was wrong to go fix it. And this is exactly what China has done. So many things were mismanaged in China that the Chinese authorities went and they said to the various government leaders, what are we doing wrong? What might work? And they all said, Shanghai. For those of you who know a little bit of Chinese history, Shanghai was the commercial capital for centuries. You know, the imperial was blocked, Shanghai did trade. They said, what about Shanghai? Well, Shanghai does this, this, and this. So, okay, everybody east of Shanghai, you can do this, the Pearl River. 3 or 4 years later, Shanghai's booming, the rest is behind, and all the other governors say, give us permission to do what Shanghai's doing. And then the rest is history. It's that moment when the pendulum goes from centralized power, command, to empowerment of individuals to make their own decisions. Now, in an academic environment, you're going to say, duh. But it's really important to understand that shift of the boundary. Think about the definition of boundaries over the course of history. How were boundaries defined of nation states for thousands of years? Largely two things, water and mountains. A river meeting a sea meant a capital was formed, Alexandria. You know, Athens, Piraeus. I could walk through all the great port capitals of the world. It was where the water met the ocean, where boats, or mountains, which were rarely crossed other than by rare people. So the nation state, the culture, the identity was largely a function of water. Until about the 19th century, when certain colonial powers decided they have a better idea, so they took out a slide rule or they carved straight lines. You know, Canada, Colorado, Wyoming, Nevada, Iraq. Think about all those boundaries that were established in the 19th century, early part of the 20th century by people far away over, and again, the differences between here and there, about nation states. And of course, we now know that those boundaries are largely dysfunctional, with the exception of maybe New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, because people really don't fight about those boundaries anything beyond football, maybe. But in Iraq, the real boundaries were tribal, and the tribal have overcome the boundaries determined by water or mountains or politics, although water is returning. But the new set of boundaries are being determined around the world by something absolutely unprecedented. What enabled the Arab Spring to happen? Social media. Social media cut across all the known boundaries of convocation, of empowerment, of authority. And you were either in or out. And it was your choice. Nobody could tell you not to get in or out. Now, China has learned to turn off social media pretty effectively in the last year. But so a whole new definition. So what did the boundary of water define? Well, it defined trade and commerce. It's called boats. Boats went up and down rivers. Then came the railroad. And then came the interstate highway. The most prosperous economic city in the United States for the first 150 years was New Orleans. Water, the Mississippi. Everything that went anywhere from anywhere went through New Orleans and, bought a night in a hotel or a restaurant, whatever they bought, music. New Orleans, after the World War, couldn't get itself organized to build an airport. And cities that were economically insignificant before the World War, and with no offense to anybody, so Charlotte, Memphis, Atlanta, woke up as the flyboys came back and said, we're going to build ourselves some airports. And the entire pattern of trade shifted from boats to planes. And the water city, the biggest water city, is now largely economically irrelevant except for tourism, and it has no international flights. You can't get out of the country from New Orleans, if you think about it. It's extraordinary how they were the port and now they're no port. So this boundary between here and there is really, really important to think about. And of course, I'm supposed to do economics, so boundaries define the opportunities for trade and commerce. Where has trade and commerce migrated in your lives? To the internet. You want to buy anything really good? You go online and price it. You want to buy anything that's mildly expensive? You don't go to the guy on the corner. You shop. The dog food industry, I understand, and I spend a lot of time in Manhattan. If you just think about this, the dog food industry has largely migrated to the internet. I mean, that's almost a point of humor. But if you live in an apartment in Manhattan, you got to buy a 30-pound bag every week. You don't want to go carry it upstairs, carry it up. You have it shipped. 30 pounds once a week, please deliver, thank you. And if you buy it out of state, there's free shipping and no tax. Amazon. It's trade and commerce migrating to the most efficient. So when boundaries move, amazing disaster and or opportunity. And I suggest that there's an enormous wealth of opportunity right in front of us all for the remainder of our lives. And let me give you a couple examples of the ones that I think. Some things that are wrong and some things are right. Be aware of picking the right problem. Far too many times in history, people think they have an answer and therefore apply it to everything in front of them. It's called give a man a hammer and everything in life is a nail. Whack, whack, whack. Maybe it was a screwdriver, or maybe it was a window. Just because you have a tool doesn't mean it's the answer to the problem. And too often you get accustomed to answering a problem simply because you have an answer. And that's largely the case of the last 5 years. Those of you who've done enough economics, you know that we've lived through roughly 25 years of declining interest rates. As interest rates go down, the price of assets go up. When I got married, interest rates were around 20%, which meant that had my wife and I borrowed a house at that time, and we had $10,000 a year to spend in interest, $10,000 at 20% bought you a $50,000 house. 10 years later, interest rates are at 10%, that same payment buys you a $100,000 house. 10 years later, at 1%, $10,000 buys you a $1 million house. So if you're not careful, you think that you have this, but you also owe $1 million. Before you used to only owe $50,000. Therein lies the dilemma of Europe. Because they didn't understand that they were accumulating massive borrowings. They just figured, I can borrow this much each year, and I don't have to pay it back. The guy who comes after me is going to have to pay it back. So they never thought about the consequences of their actions. So you have now relatively low interest rates, but in the case of Europe, they can't borrow. They simply can't roll over their debt. In the case of the US, because everybody else is in bad shape and we're in less bad shape, we're the, what did somebody once call it? The largest dwarf in the room. Therefore, we're able to borrow endlessly, but we have the largest outstanding indebtedness. We have the same problem. It's just that the punch bowl keeps getting filled, and we have to deal with it. And I'm not making a political statement about that. This debt is not going to be paid by Republicans or Democrats. It's going to be paid by you. How do you like that idea? Shall I borrow some more and have a good time, or you want to be left with that debt? No, you don't like that idea. So when I say pick a problem, be really aware of the problem. So in the last 20 or 30 years before '07, nonsense was the more you borrowed, the more money you made. And some of you will understand this. If you had a company and you had 10% borrowing for 20 years, you're borrowing a 10-year bond at 20%, and you refinance that at 8%, the difference between 8 and 10 was deemed income. So you printed an asset on the other side of your balance sheet. If you did, so the net present value of the savings of 2% times 20 years was a lot of money. That immediately printed on your balance. So you all of a sudden, let's just say you had $100 million extra on your balance sheet. And you do that a couple of times, you got 200, 300, 400 million. That money never existed. Let's be honest. But accounting-wise, constantly refinancing your liabilities meant the creation of assets, and it was legitimate. But it's a little bit Alice in Wonderland, unless you were able to sell your assets at that particular moment. So a lot of the losses we have are simply the unwinding of these phantom profits, except if you were long or short. And think also about the greatest wealth-creating exercises or job-creating exercises of the last 5 years. What does Singapore, Korea, most of China, Google, and Apple have in common? They have no debt. They didn't play the game. The clear path to prosperity, which was excess leverage, they didn't engage in. That's pretty amazing. They completely, called the Pendulum, played the opposite game. What did they do? They congregated talent. So I would suggest that leverage is still widely available on the planet. It's just not of money, but it's of people. That's the biggest knowledge gift I can share. Leverage hasn't evaporated, it's available. So if you can create a business that congregates talent rather than money. So what has Google done? They congregated talent around a particular exercise. What's the exercise? The same thing Carlos Slim did in Mexico. He's now the wealthiest man in the world. They took society's inevitable cash flows that were dysfunctional because of a number of reasons, and they made them functional. Think about Google and advertising. Think back a few years ago, if you were sending your kid to this school, you'd probably have to come out here, buy a copy of the local newspaper, look up apartments, wander around, and find it. Now if you're going to send your kid to Chicago or Delaware or Shanghai, you go to the net. You go to the newspaper. Think about the immense dysfunctionality of placing an ad in a paper hoping that somebody might read it, and somebody might come, and somebody might go to the broker. That's nuts. What do you want? You find it. The world of go finding has been replaced by the world of being found. Second biggest point. Be found. How do you be found? You put yourself on the path of good ideas and situate wisely. It's not racing out and finding. It's not the alpha male. Women are much better at this. Men are lousy, but we're learning. Why did Google pick advertising as their first revenue base? I happen to know Larry and Sergey very well. They said, this is one of society's largest, most inevitable cash flows, and there's nobody going to protect the idiot vendor. No legislative body is going to protect stupid advertising agencies. And clients have no loyalty to bad ads. They migrate overnight. What is Google working on next? What are society's other greatest dysfunctional cash flows? Inevitable but dysfunctional cash flows. Telephony, smartphones, the Android. What's next? Energy distribution. What's after that? What's the big prize? What is contemporary society's largest, most inevitable, necessary cash flow with immense dysfunctionality? And this is not a political statement. It's healthcare. Think of it. Half the industry is in the business of charging a fee to later say no. A lot of people can't come in no matter what they do. And, unlike telephony or advertising, it is the one area of modern society with the greatest advancements in technology and science. What's happening at the high end of medicine right now is astonishing. Think if we could Googleize healthcare the way we did it to advertising, what the world would be. It would be an incredible place. So they know this, and the reason they're not working there first is everybody would fight them. They're fixing things they can easily fix. So as you think about what you're going to do, think about picking a problem that's comprehensible, that's simple, that makes sense. I mentioned Apple. One of the reasons Apple is the most valuable company ever done is they took a narrow slice of the economy, basically telecommunications and entertainment, and it made it functional. And if you don't understand it, your daughter does. And if you're sitting around the table saying in the family powwow for the 401k, where are we going to put our money, and you need a unanimity of purpose, I get it. Not long ago, I heard the chairman of Sony speak at just before he got fired or retired, I don't know, at a Wall Street Journal breakfast. And he said, this was soon after Steve Jobs had died, that he was very jealous of Apple. He said, he had a company that had 800 or 900 different products. They didn't talk to each other. They didn't have brand unity. They had individual patent protection and marketing plans, and everybody had their little kingdom. He said, Apple has 3, maybe 4 products. They all walk with each other, they all talk to each other, and they have various degrees of horsepower. And they all are seamless. And the important decisions are held by people who really concentrate, and everybody else is making a better widget. He said, I wish I had that clarity. 5 products, 800. And then they got hit by the tsunami. And their manufacturing got wiped out. And Sony's not toast, but it's going nowhere compared to Apple. Clarity of purpose, understanding how you reallocate society's inevitable cash flows. And a couple more, if I may. When interest rates were declining, asset prices was going up, everybody was prosperous, everybody thought they were brilliant, everybody thought that what they were doing mattered. In fact, the tide was rising. Ask any ship captain. He says, first you understand the tides and then the winds, until you're out at sea. But don't fight the tides and the winds. You know, in the days of New York City Harbor, you've all been there before boaters, you couldn't sail up the Hudson unless the big ocean tide was going up. So you had to really understand the ocean because the river was always going down. But when the river was going down and the tide was going out, stay put. So you had to both know the tide and know the river, but it was about tides. And right now, I think a lot of people are confused. They think that what they do matters, as opposed to understanding that they're passengers on a global tide of events. And what you do really does matter, but don't ignore the tides. Here's a tidal shift that I missed completely graduating from Ohio Wesleyan. The greatest single wealth-creating event of my lifetime, of our lifetime, was technology. When I was here, and Marty will remember, there wasn't even a tech course option. Zero, it wasn't on the curriculum. And I don't blame anybody, it wasn't on the curriculum anywhere. Nobody understood that this was very useful. But think about the quick migration of technology over the last 25 years. It started out selling machines, because that's what people thought was valuable, PCs. It quickly migrated to the opposite of a PC. Here's the Pendulum again, the software. And then we had to buy a CD, and then you could download it, so CDs were no longer relevant because you get it on the net. And it's migrated again completely to solution providing. IBM doesn't sell hardware or software, they sell solutions. Xerox doesn't sell hardware or software, they sell solutions. Xerox has a division that went to all the states that have Easy Pass. We're all trying to have their own little divisions of wizards creating Easy Pass technology, so your machine, Easy Pass never worked in the next state. Xerox came along and said, we will provide all the North Atlantic, Mid-Atlantic, New England states a unified system so that you can take your Easy Pass from New York to New Jersey. Out of job, a bunch of Easy Pass programming scientists, wizards in each state. In business, massive revenue, shorter traffic. So it's about solutions, and I think herein lies a tremendous opportunity for y'all looking forward. So if you think about how many things don't work. How much time do you have? And think about being a solution provider to that, bringing it inefficiencies. The inefficiencies will happen whether we do it or not. Somebody's going to think it through. A friend of mine teaches at MIT, and she says that her students have absolutely no concerns about the rest of their life because they will never work for anybody, because they've learned from their parents and aunts and uncles that working for somebody means you might get fired. They're all going to be entrepreneurs because they see so many things that are broken out there that they can go fix. Think of this one, the lottery. Anybody ever played the lottery? You got to go someplace to buy a lottery ticket. Is that true here? In New York, in Manhattan, you got to physically walk your body to buy a piece of paper? What if you could buy the lottery on the net? How many more lottery tickets do you think they'd sell? About a bazillion? Who's fighting it? The 8 guys on the east side who have concessions to sell lottery tickets. Is the purpose of the lottery to create a revenue stream for these 8 people? Or to use the proceeds of the lottery, which is largely healthcare and education? Somebody's going to figure this out. It's the most digital product available. There's no analog component to a lottery ticket. I just give you that. This is all going to get fixed. When does change occur? Occurs 2 times. When disaster strikes, or when opportunity subtly screams. The masses hear the former. The masses hear disaster strike. A few people hear the subtle scream of opportunity. Artists know how to do it because they're self-motivated. Entrepreneurs know how to do it because they can make a buck. And think about that, because I'll give you the case of General Motors. Y'all remember when the chairman of General Motors was told he couldn't fly anymore to Washington? He couldn't take his big jet? Do you remember that a couple of years ago? So what did he do? He drove. It was this huge man in a tiny car, followed by 8 Suburbans, 25 press cars, and they finally cornered him in a truck stop in West Virginia. He was exhausted, he was tired, and they got an interview. I remember hearing it. The guy said, I can see the end. It's coming. The brick wall is coming at me at 60 miles an hour. I remember saying, you moron, brick walls don't move. You're driving into the brick wall. It's when the passive verb tense takes over Markets change, my customers change their mind, I ran out of paint. You know, when the passive verb tense takes over, there's a lack of accountability in human action. And there's a lot of that going on in politics right now. It's the Republicans, it's the Democrats, you know, it's the PCP, it's the socialists. No. It's that fundamentally in the West, we're solving the wrong problem. I was in China a lot. But one of the times recently I met the man who was the recent governor of Hong Kong. Chinese ethnic, UK, US educated, friend of the West, but very aware. He said, and I was with a whole bunch of people from Saudi Arabia, and I was the only American. They sort of forgot there was a Westerner in the room. At one point he said, oh, I'm sorry. I said, no, continue. He said, problem with the West is you pick wrong problem. China, we picked wrong problem for many years. Lead to disaster. Now we have 4 priorities: healthcare, education, infrastructure, and right now I forget the 4th. He says, what's the priority of the West? Speaking largely about Europe. What is the plan? You have no plan. And it seems to be you're trying to raise money to pay people to stop working. I said, that's a stupid plan. We did that for 60 years, and now we're letting people go to work. We're going to beat you. And the way he said it hit me like a hammer on the forehead. He said, pick your problem wisely. And I'm not suggesting what the problem you should pick is. You'll figure it out. But pick it. Don't let it be assigned to you, because therein will lie great opportunity. Opportunity, security. Beware of security. If you look for too much security, you'll find it. If you look for maximum security, you'll find it. You know the synonym for maximum security? Jail. Jail is maximum security. If you get maximum security, you lose a lot of options and you lose a lot of incentive to do things. So be aware of going for too much security. A couple more. And if anybody's got to leave, do so, and I'll happily to take any questions you want in a minute. Politics and pizza. So you can say, where's he going with this one? It seems that the job of politicians in the Western world right now is to see, and let's just pick the US, but I could pick France or Italy or Greece, see the nation's economy as a finite amount of resources. And my job is to come home with more than my fair slices. So if there's 8 of us around a table, my job would be to come back with 3/8 and let you all fight about 5/8. But if I'm really good, I'll get 4/8, and you'll have to split the other half. So one of the major problems we have is that we think if we take it from these guys and we give it to those guys, or we take it from those guys and we give it to these guys, it'll be better. But they're speaking as if the amount of resources were finite. Would you rather bake pizza or divide pizza? This should be an easy answer. You want to bake pizza. But the real thing you want to do is own the pizzeria. It's a much better equation to own the pizzeria than to try to divide a finite. And that's exactly what China and India are doing. You're saying, we want to own the means of production rather than divide. And so if in the past 20 or 30 years our nation was held captive by a bunch of financial engineers, and it's true, you'll figure that out, both political and economic, we know that we're eventually going to be run once again by real engineers, mechanical, hydraulic, electric, real engineers who build real things, right? We know that's going to happen. Why aren't we there yet? Because financial engineering is no longer an option with interest rates this low. The answer, I believe, is that we've temporarily been hijacked once again by a new brand of engineer, which I call the electoral engineer. The guy who thinks everything is a polling question. And everything is not a polling question. Would you have a bridge built by a polling engineer? Let's put some beams here. No, I think tonight we'll move them there. Let's move them here. Let's not go there, let's go there. Would you want your house built by a polling expert? You want your life determined by nightly polls? So in the Western world, we're caught in this absurd, temporary, I think, situation where major decisions about the allocation of resources are being made by people who think everything is a polling question. And whether you're a Republican or Democrat, and I don't care, you could blame Romney because if he has good ideas, he can't articulate them because the pollsters won't let him. If you like Obama and he has good ideas, he can't articulate them because his pollsters won't let him. And we will break through this. The pendulum hasn't completely shifted. And we'll do it either when we run out of money, the brick wall comes at us really fast, or when individuals within us find particular sets of opportunity. And people are finding that opportunity now. They're not waiting for the economy to get fixed. It's the Googles, it's the Apples, it's 100 other small businesses, largely privately held businesses or family businesses that can take decisions rationally, not because they have to report or somebody told them they have to this, that. They don't have to write minutes. Who wants large reports with large amount of footnotes? As Henry Kissinger said, the decisions he made in life were those he had to make. He spent a lifetime preparing, but he made them. Now, you could say he made right or wrong. I just pick him as an example, or Bill Clinton, or whoever you want. Make decisions. So be really aware not to do the wrong problem. Doing good and giving back are really important. And I encourage everybody to think hard about that. But don't make the mistake a lot of people who chose that path think that they therefore have a hall pass which exempts them from being productive. You have to do a good job at that too. You have to learn how to write good proposals. Or if you're in the grant side, distinguish good from bad proposals so that your resources are used wisely. But don't think that because your effort and your intention is noble that you're exempt from productivity. And a lot of people have made that mistake. My cause is worthy, fund me. No. Your cause is worthy, but why you? Think that through very wisely. Have a tremendous respect for personal integrity. Evidence it and recognize it. And now I've completely left economics, and I don't know how to emphasize the importance of that over time, but really good deals are done with people, and even though you may have a legal agreement, you don't consult it. Bad deals are done with really good agreements, but that don't work even though the agreement was tight. And in this period of transition, we are evidencing a period where in the world of financial leverage, those whose behavior exceeded the circumference of tolerable behavior did very well. And those who were prudent within the circumference of tolerable behavior often were left behind and punished. But that was an anomaly. And the world is catching up with that. But be very, very, very alert. A couple other things, since as you go forth, and I say, if you're studying economics, pay a lot of attention to art, to science, to mathematics, to theology, history, literature, on and on. Pay attention to things. And if I leave you with a couple of thoughts, I say, what do all of those things have in common? Because too often the expert articulates what these things have in difference with each other. What's the major difference between, a Lutheran and a Methodist, or a Shia and a Sunni? No. It's relevant, but it doesn't matter. What matters is what do they all have in common? And I think in a liberal arts school, you are blessed with the opportunity to see all these things have in common. And as evidence, think about a really great young person learning to play the piano who becomes a really great pianist. It's statistically impossible to measure and memorize in linear capacity the 12,000 notes that comprise that concerto. But it's entirely possible to get the rhythm of that concerto and therefore be able to remember and play it. Why is the mind able to remember a rhythm when it can't remember a linear progression of notes? And some of you here would argue and tell me it's the opposite. I could be wrong. But nonetheless, some people can remember the whole thing. Why can they do that? Some people can come in a room that's a mess and see a golden opportunity. Some people will see a golden opportunity and only complain. Think about what you learned by all of those sciences. What is the great lessons learned from all of them? What's the rhythm? What's the harmony? What's the unanimity? Study theology, but study all of them. Earlier this year, I spent almost a month in Bhutan, and it was a real revelation to spend time in a country that is largely unchanged and at peace. One road in, one road across. It's double the size of Austria. People rarely leave because they can't figure out why they would go anywhere else. They live so well. It's a remarkable time, as I said, in the world right now, of immense transition in everything. I think you are blessed as students to enter the world where you see it. The old world order isn't going to prevail. A new world order will unfold. It'll be largely more democratic, by that small d or large d or Republican, I have no clue, but it's going to be more about equality of opportunity than people realize. There's a trap for the entire Western world in particular, that concept largely on which we were founded, the Bill of Rights. A lot of people came here because here they had the right to go achieve their dream. And I'm not speaking, except for those of you who are fortunate enough to be children of first-generation immigrants or immigrants yourselves. You came here for the opportunity. Unfortunately, the word rights has largely migrated, the pendulum again, like the Spanish word, so mis derechos. I have the right to receive as opposed to the right to achieve. And therein lies an immense political battle. If you've seen the movie Marie Antoinette, it was the nobles who held the right to receive. If you've seen all kinds of military battles about about Japan or about the Bolsheviks. I had the right to receive, but we're caught in the right to receive or the right to achieve. Which do you have a right to? Should horses be rewarded if 10 of them start at the race for the one who wins the race? Or should the prize be given at the end of the race for all 10 who showed up equally because it's not fair that one knew how to run faster? That's fair, right? Or is it fair that the horse that wins? You might sense I have a preference there, but it's not me I'm talking about. So as you see these words, the pendulum again, morphing in their definition, be really alert, because when resources get finite, the right to receive gets brutally punished, and the right to achieve either gets realized or emigrates. That's called Stanford or Boston. And think about that, because that's hugely important in the rest of your life. And finally, a couple of comments. If you go to work for somebody, your partner, your friend, what might you think about? What makes sense or doesn't make sense when considering where to work, where to get employed? Think about a place and understand their decision-making apparatus. And if you don't understand there, don't work there. It's very simple. Be in harmony with your employer. Remember, the valuable asset in the equation is you. You're putting more time into that than the employer is putting valuable money. Do you understand how they operate? How are values created or destroyed in that enterprise? Understand it. Pay attention. Ask them. Go home and discuss it with your husband, wife, girlfriend, mother, father, somebody. How are conflicts resolved or not? Is there a clarity of mission or not? Sony, Apple. Clarity of mission in Sony was ambiguous at best. But some of you in the room remember the Walkman. You know, there were a few moments when they nailed it. But after that, who in the political arena speaks to you with a clarity of mission? Very few people right now, because they're not rewarded for doing so. They're rewarded for other reasons in the current, and I don't speak of the US, I mean in the Western world. Who in France is rewarded for speaking with clarity? Or Italy, or Greece? Be very, very alert to what you do understand or don't understand, and understand the difference. I would add to that, although it's almost oxymoronic, be very humble about what you know and what you don't know. Don't assume you know something that you don't know. BS doesn't get paid, although there's a lot of it out there. Understand incentives. Be very clear if you are going to join an organization that you understand the incentives under which that organization's operate or doesn't. We're probably the only country in the world that was taught that paying taxes is the right thing to do. Oliver Wendell Holmes, you buy civilization. You ask an Italian, a Greek, taxes? No, they get lifted off the top by the political elite. Anybody in Africa, Middle East, any Latin American? Our value system is not exportable until there's a general belief that the money that's used is used wisely. And if we jeopardize that in the behavior of our leaders, then our people are not going to feel very happy about paying taxes. This is a big issue out there, by the way. We shouldn't assume that Greeks should pay tax. As a Greek friend of mine said, it says, Greeks don't pay tax. I said, why? He says, well, for 450 years we were occupied by the Turks. We don't like giving money to Ottomans. I said, but they left 100 years ago, just in case. It's not part of their inheritance. So, and finally, two more. Don't underestimate the incredible resourcefulness of human intelligence. People are really smart. Have you ever dealt with a smart 7-year-old or a smart 6-year-old? The incredible ability she has to just figure out everything and ask all the right questions, uncorrupted. It's quite astonishing. And that skill set is there. And okay, we make a lot of mistakes. And I guess finally I'll say, I think there are extraordinary opportunities out in front for y'all in the next few years. But they're not in the obvious places where they were before. The world order is going to get realigned in almost everything. You can't make money refinancing your liabilities, but you can borrow very cheap. The cost of money, of borrowing money, is as low as it's ever been. If you can't make more than like 1.5% or 2% on your plan, then, go to sleep. But money is readily available. What's not available is the ability to print money by refinancing your liabilities and being clever. There are businesses that used to be really good businesses, like the railroad. But when the railroad was a good business, they'd put a box of cereal on at $1 and sell it at $10 because they were the only store at the end of the line. Now you put on and they charge you 10 cents and it goes there. It's not a good business. But there is a business in just about everything. So I just would close and then happily open up to questions. I think the world is not making a lot of sense, but there's tremendous opportunity. And I'll give you if you want to study one person who's alive today, who's maybe the most extraordinary exponent of understanding this, it's Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore, the George Washington of Singapore. He's alive. He's an extraordinary man. That little nation state between Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia, swamp-bound, ugly, hot, happened to have been an English colony, and he learned a few things. When they were an English colony, the war came along. He spent time in a Japanese internment camp, English-educated, Chinese native. He came out and said, we have to do something. These three nation states went back to being colonial exporters of raw materials. He said, I'm gonna sit in the middle and help them do business with each other. They don't trust each other. I'm gonna ship goods back and forth and write letters of credit between them, bank finance. He said, but then I need a banking system. Made a banking. I need ships, so he became the shipping capital of that part of the world right after 1946. A few years later said, course correction, it's not about ships, it's about containers. It's a lot easier to put stuff in containers and take them on and off than it is to just pour the rubber in a boat for 3 days. Containers, logistics, communications. Think of it as a sailboat. If you want to take a sailboat from here to there, you don't grab the tiller and hold it firm. You go like this all the time. Course corrections in order to get where you want to go. Apparent contradictory decisions in order to go straight. Because the wind, waves, other boats. So his ability to constantly reverse course or reinvent himself because he understood that the world events were unfolding faster. So, containers. Some of you were old enough to remember when he was famous for not allowing chewing gum and cutting off everybody's hair. No long hair. Some of you won't remember, know what I'm talking about. But there was a time when people started to grow their hair real long. But he said that was stupid. When internet came along a few years later, in Cablevision, most countries allowed 2 companies. How many cable providers do you have here? 1 or 2? You can choose between 2, right? Do you have 2 dry cleaners? How many restaurants? Okay, so why should we have 2 cable providers and not 2 dry cleaners or 2 restaurants? The answer is that most governments use this as a revenue source. By allowing only 2, they got huge fees from these 2, who in turn got monopoly or duopoly status, and they all became billionaires. And the government got huge checks from creating 1 or 2 billionaires. Kuan Yew came along and said, that's a dumb idea. I want to give free internet to my entire country so that they will leapfrog the advantages of technology and get smarter 10 years faster than anybody else, and it worked. His major reversal in the last few years was to recognize that the world didn't have enough refining capacity, so he built refineries, but not there, but in India, and gambling. He has built the 3 greatest casinos in Asia. He outlaws it for Singaporean citizens. But he's created a couple 100,000 jobs in hotels and whatnot. And I just say this because he has the idea, which is to create a very prosperous nation state out of a little piece of dirt. It's basically 1/3 the size of Houston. But in order to do that, he realizes he has to constantly evolve his thinking. So his mission is clear, his tactics shift. And I think that's sort of what I suggest is what the world awaits us ahead. Your mission may be clear, and your ethics and principle and integrity and the opportunity, just recognizing your tactics may have to shift in immense contradiction to each other in order to get where you want to go. And I'm happy to talk about anything economic or monetary policy or whatnot, or politics. Thank you very much. So why does art matter? Because artists allow themselves to think about things freely and clearly without prejudice. Doesn't mean they're all good artists. Why is it that you can listen to a Bach piano cantata and like it when it was written 400 years ago? Why is it you can smile when listening to Mozart? And we could go through the 20th century. I was just going way back in time to make a point. Or look at a Renaissance painting and go, wow. Because there's an essential harmony of understanding through all of these things. And if you can find that essential harmony of understanding in today's complex problems, and I could say the same of mathematics, or the same of science, and certainly literature and economic policy triumphs over political, eventually. Anyway, anybody? Who's going to win the election?
I was wondering about our competition with China, because we're importing so much from China, and of course we can't export very much. And I wondered, our labor standards here with minimum wage and right to collective bargaining and et cetera, do they have those things in China, or are the workers being exploited?
I think the workers are clearly being exploited, but it's not new. They were probably far more exploited under the emperors and under the Communist Party. It's the fact that many of them are no longer exploited and have an economic opportunity that they never did. China's going to move through that very quickly. Did you read this morning that they kicked out Bo from the party? You know, the guy whose wife apparently murdered? Well, I don't want to be a cynic, but they kicked him out because they couldn't take him to trial as a member of the party because the party has no wrongdoers. But once he's out, then they'll probably nail him. And China it's the most unprecedented reallocation of human resources in modern times. They are going to have tremendous problems, and they're already having them. They mask them. Their real battle, and this is a digression, if you think back, and this was told to me by a Japanese friend of mine who became a very good friend. I said, why did y'all start the war? It wasn't quite that direct. He said, we were an isolated nation unto ourselves. The West came and opened us up. And in the early part of the 20th century, we did everything you told us to do. We built Pittsburgh, we built Birmingham, we built Liverpool. We became an industrial base, but we had no fuel or food sufficient, and the West held us hostage. And again, this is a mildly revisionist view of history, but it's relevant. We then had to go find our own food and fuel. Why did the Germans go to North Africa before the World War? Because they'd become an industrial state, they didn't have food, they had no fuel. So they were marching off towards the desert to get the oil. We were marching off to the desert to get the oil. It was them or us. Had the Germans gotten it, it would have been an entirely different outcome. China now has tremendously modernized and doesn't have sufficient food or fuel. And they're going to go find it. So the issue, the real thing to think about, it, if I may, is, yes, what you said, but is how are they going to find their food and fuel? They own all of the agricultural resources in Africa they can get their hands on. They're completely distracting us with North Korea. What they really want is all the resources in the Sea of Japan. Those of you who remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, and this was taught to me by a Chinese, said, it looked like the Russians really wanted to attack us from Cuba. They didn't care about Cuba. What they really wanted is us out of Turkey so they could take all of Eastern Europe. There was a trade. So big distraction. So largely what's happening in North Korea is they're boom, 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 boom. They could squash that guy with their thumb. What they really care about is what's happening in the Sea of Japan, and the Arctic, and in Africa. The mineral and energy and petroleum and agricultural resources. That's the battle. So we can happily talk about human resources, I mean human rights and all that, and it's very relevant. But I don't think it's the issue that's going to confront you in your lives in dealing with that part of the world. They're playing a fundamentally different game. And they're doing a very good job at it. I give them a lot of credit. They're playing very good chess. Yes?
I spent last week at your ex-firm GAM in Chicago, and they're not particularly optimistic about what's going on around the world in terms of their investment outlooks right now. Are you comfortable talking to yourself a little bit about, as an investor and a strategist, what would you be telling clients today?
Sure.
What are you telling your institutional clients?
It was a different firm. Mine was the UK one.
Okay.
Global Asset Management.
This was the UBS one I was at.
But, okay, think of it this way. Well, I'll just walk through when I graduated in 1973. There was a mess. Every president was a short-term or half-term president. And there were a legacy of problems from the World War, from the Vietnam War, from the quadrupling of oil prices, and the world didn't deal with it. So the world panicked, interest rates went up from 4, 7, 18, 19, 20%. From a portfolio point of view, the right thing to have done at that time was to own cash and roll your deposits every month for a higher interest rate. Certainly don't work, certainly don't borrow money, certainly don't employ anybody, because you got murdered. Bonds and stocks got killed. Right about the time that everybody understood that that was right, a cowboy came along. He picked up the legacy of Paul Volcker, and we entered the greatest period of economic prosperity that we've ever known, Reagan and Clinton. So it wasn't partisan. Interest rates came down. So the thing to do from a portfolio was the exact opposite than what you'd known for 10 years, was to buy the longest duration bonds and lock them in. Imagine in 1882 you'd bought 30-year bonds at 16%. You'd still be collecting 16%. But everybody was commonly aware that rates were going to go up forever. So at the pendulum, just by the time it becomes common knowledge, it's the opposite. There we go up for 20 years. The only thing you had to really understand, and I mentioned earlier, is you only had to know a couple of things really clearly. And you had to know that interest rates had a long way to go. So everything that involved leverage of money, and you didn't even need to be productive. Just be smart about money and borrowing. That went on for a long, long time. As I said already earlier, just before that party collapsed, the wise group of young entrepreneurs figured out that that game was over, and they became productive rather than clever. They became, the Google story. So what I think is, if I were to say forward, I see a very low probability that interest rates rise dramatically. Who's the biggest loser if interest rates rise dramatically? Washington, Inc. Everything connected with Washington. The amount of losses that would occur to the nation, to the banks, to the pension plans on a rise of interest rates would be catastrophic. And they're going to do everything they can to avoid it. Therefore, we have an increasing chance of looking like Japan. You don't have to deal with a problem if you can finance it, or finesse it, or ignore it until you have to do it. So what Japan did in this situation was keep interest rates so low and borrowing costs so low, and they told every intervened bank, let's just say, and I'm going to pick Marty because I know him the longest, the Bank of Marty Cal gets a credit from the government. So we say, now you have to own 5% government bonds. We come back next year, now you have to own 7, now you have to own 10. So Japan, now 20 years later, 30% of their portfolio is government bonds. So the government creates an obligatory market to keep interest rates low. Interest rates are low. I think that's the likely outcome. So what do you do with low interest rates? Well, you borrow money wisely. But you don't do it with the purpose of refinancing. You do it to be productive. How many things in the economy are waiting to be fixed? Well, no, most of them. What DHL and FedEx did to the post office is about to happen to just about every sector of the economy. How broken were cars a few years ago? Cars are pretty good right now. How broken are trains? So I think it's pretty remarkable. So I would go, leverage is available. It's no longer financial. I call it no longer walking capital. Sorry, no longer a working capital, it's now walking capital. Be the congregator of great talent. And be immensely productive as opposed to clever. Energy in the US has gotten smart. Natural gas prices at $2 or $3 metric foot as opposed to $14. Let's pay attention here. Not that we want to become entirely energy self-sufficient, but we're on our way. Cheap energy is not a bad thing. So I could walk through, buy really good assets that are cheap and do what you understand. Cash is boring, bonds are very dangerous because interest rates may go up, and there are a lot of fixed income equivalent things you can buy that don't have the duration risk of a bond portfolio. One very clever thing that's happening right now in the world is people are going to the European banks that are in big trouble and say, give me your best loans. They have to sell something. Spain announced today they have to have $58 billion they got to raise or something. I'm running out of fingers. You're not going to buy their bad loans. So you can buy the best performing loans from banks at a huge discount and get a very high collection. So you have to be alert. So, like I said, it's either a disaster or opportunity. Choose opportunity. Really high quality names that are productive. Anybody who has a monopoly, cartel, or concession is vulnerable. I would happily cut my cable bill in a minute if I had another way to get what I want. I don't see why I should have 2 vendors of one product and not 2 restaurants or 2 dry cleaners. It's not a particularly difficult technology. And it's happening. Y'all probably don't use cable, you stream, right? You get it for free anyway, so it's getting fixed. Whatever you want.
How much economic sense does it make for the United States to still be the world's policeman with our global military force?
It probably doesn't, unless the vacuum is taken up by a friend. In that particular case, I would encourage you to study a couple of the other great has-been world-leading economic powers. The one that particularly fascinates me is Holland. Holland was the world's leading economic power for a couple hundred years. They fought with the Spaniards, but between the two of them, they owned the world. And later came the English. Holland is probably the most prosperous per capita GDP place in the Western world. They have no military presence. You can't name their president or any recent president. They have a vibrant healthcare educational system. They have problems because there's no immunity. And they figured out to be world leaders in trade, the diamond business, the commodity business, the refinery business. All kinds of businesses are owned by these people. Retailing, book publishing. And the same with the Denmarks and the Swedens and the Norways. Because in the period of crisis, they become ever more productive. Now, they had the good fortune that we were doing the military cover. So, as an individual, it's Canada. What a brilliant country. Well run, and who ever heard of their military engagements other than taking us out of Iran, our hostages? It's quite a remarkable. So that's my point about protagonists, passengers, or roadkill. We cannot be the world's policeman because we're running out of resources. The Chinese guy said to me, he said, why the S&P flat for 12 years? Standard & Poor's Index. He said, it's very simple, and I'm not agreeing, I just think it was astonishing, the clarity with which he said it. He says, you spend all your marginal cash flow on military and entitlements. We spend all our marginal cash flow on increased productivity. We win. And I'm not saying I agree, I just thought it was astonishing the way he saw it so clearly. We can't do it alone. The danger is, of course, if we withdraw, that space will be occupied in 2 minutes by other people. The Russians would happily control Middle East energy flow. And if not them, the Chinese. And every time the Germans get restless against it, the Russians turn off the gas from the Ukraine. And everybody contemplates no gas for a month. And they turn it back on, just to remind them who has the cards. So the intersection of politics and economics and history and art is really important, because it's often not linear.
Will you stay for a little bit and have some cookies?
Sure, I love some cookies. I love being here, I'm happy to be back, thank you very much.